Following the release of the Universes Beyond Fallout set, the building of great commander decks may fall onto you. That's why we here at the Planeswalker Project have prepared this special educational video for you to better understand these 4 commander precon decks. Today we will focus on the Mutant Menace, a black, green, and blue deck that focuses on radiation counters, as well as some self-mill, and of course the namesake mutant creature type. To begin, let's take a look at our 2 main commander options, as well as the deck's signature mechanic. The Wise Mothman is our cover commander, a 3/3 insect mutant for 4 mana. It has flying, and whenever it enters or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So before we go any further, let's explain what a rad counter is, as it's critical to our understanding and analysis of this card. A rad counter is indicative of how much nuclear radiation that you've received. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, you'll mill a quantity of cards equal to your rad counter count. For each non-land card that you mill this way, you'll lose a life and you lose 1 rad counter. This mechanic is unique to this set and this deck alone, and it can be used offensively to mill our opponents, while also milling ourselves to build up a graveyard that we can utilize later on. As we mill non-land cards, we lose life and our radiation level goes down. This might be a bit of a risky type of counter, but our deck is specifically designed to take advantage of it, so we can handle the radiation. Back to the Mothman. His first ability is potent, giving each player a rad counter just on entering, and then 1 additional one on attack. This is a very easy way to begin building up radiation on the battlefield. What's more, whenever 1 or more non-lands are milled, we get to put +1/+1 counters onto our creatures, but that will trigger off of any mill effect. This would be a great commander to lean into a full-on mill strategy, using the rad counters as an additional boon to the mill. Our secondary commander is the Master Transcendent. This is a 2/4 mutant for 4 mana. When the Master Transcendent enters, target player gets 2 rad counters. You can also tap them to put target creature card in the graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's now a green mutant with base power 3/3, losing any other colors and creature types. This commander leans into a bit more of a kindred strategy, focusing on making mutants. Again, we have the easily triggered rad counter distribution, a great bonus, but the activated ability gives us graveyard recursion. There is a slight restriction in being only able to reanimate creatures that have been milled this turn, but it also making them into base 3/3s and making them mutants can work wonders in synergizing with the rest of our strategy. So our deck really wants to make the most of the radiation counters. See, we're playing with mutants, and the ghouls and then some of the wasteland that took the nuclear fallout, the radiation has affected them. So it doesn't phase us as much when we take on the rad counters, but our opponents will slowly succumb to the effects. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the best new cards in the deck. We got a ton of new cards from the Fallout set in each commander deck. Many of them are tied to the deck's central theme, and so we're going to help you hone in on the cards that you'll want to keep in the deck as you upgrade your build. I'm going to largely focus on the cards that will be good to keep in the deck because they contribute to what the deck wants to do. With so many new cards, there are a lot of good cards that stand well on their own, but might not contribute as much to the main strategy. Bloatfly Swarm, one of my least favorite enemies in game, is actually a really good card here. It costs 4 mana for a flying 0/0 insect mutant. It enters with 5 +1/+1 counters on it, which is already solid stats for a 4-drop. If damage would be dealt to the Bloatfly Swarm while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage, and instead remove that many +1/+1 counters from it, and then give each player a rad counter for each +1/+1 counter removed this way. This synergizes so nicely with what our commander wants to do. See, the Mothman gives out the +1/+1 counters, as do a lot of cards in this deck, and so that can help replenish the Bloatfly Swarm's counters. This can easily become a creature that opponents do not want to damage, as every point of damage will remove them and give rad counters out. If a player has too many rad counters, they will have to mill more and more cards, and losing rad counters can also impact their life total to a point that they can no longer take any more radiation. But you, the magnificent and handsome survivor, might have no issue ramming this thing into oblivion to give out those tasty, tasty rad counters. Cathedral Acolyte is a 1/2 human cleric for 2 mana. Each creature you control with a counter on it has Ward 1. You can also tap it to put a +1/+1 counter onto a target creature that entered the battlefield this turn. See, our deck is going to have a lot of threats. We also give out +1/+1 counters quite a bit in this deck, as is the standard for this color combination in general. Giving Ward 1 to those creatures might make them a pain for opponents who are trying to deal with us. We also have the option to give a +1/+1 counter to a freshly entered creature for extra value, as we can ensure that that creature gets its word protection. Feral Ghoul is by and far my favorite creature in the deck. This is a 2/2 zombie mutant for 3 mana with Menace. Whenever another creature you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter onto the Feral Ghoul. When the Feral Ghoul dies, each opponent gets a number of rad counters equal to the Ghoul's power. That's impressive. This is a very aggressive creature, both in-game and on cardboard. It gives extra relevance to dying creatures, making it larger and more dangerous. The Menace makes it hard to block, although opponents might not want to block it given the death trigger. We can use our various means to put extra +1/+1 counters onto the Ghoul, which point the number of rad counters it wants to give to our opponents will make it a target to keep alive, ironically. The other benefit is that this only gives those rad counters to opponents, and so we can bulk up this thing to maximize the radiation that it will give to our opponents. Glowing One is another 2/2 zombie mutant for 3 mana. This one has Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get 4 rad counters. Lastly, whenever a player mills a non-land card, you gain 1 life. I have to say, the zombies in this deck are something else. This is just as aggressive as the Feral Ghoul, which is on brand for the Glowing One and the danger it represents in the game. It giving 4 rad counters to any player that it connects to is just amazing, as opponents will want to throw anything in the way of this to prevent it from dealing its combat damage to them. Lastly, that final ability negates the downside to our rad counters. See, we do lose 1 life as we mill non-land cards, but with the Glowing One out, we'll actually gain 1 life, giving us a net 0 life change. However, this also will give us life gain upon our opponent's milling, as it triggers whenever a player mills, so we will actually gain life as our opponents hit their non-land cards. Hancock Ghoulish Mayor is a 2/1 zombie mutant advisor for 3 mana. Each other creature you control that's a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on him. He also is undying, meaning that if he dies and he doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on him, you can return him to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on him. This is an excellent creature to dump counters onto, as he buffs up both our zombies and our mutants based on the number of counters on him. Several of the creatures in this deck have abilities that scale as they grow larger, like the Feral Ghoul, and since nearly every creature in this deck is a mutant, this will be a very wide range of effect. Harold and Bob, First Newmans, is a 3/3 Treefolk mutant for 3 mana. It has both Vigilance and Reach. When it dies, if it was a creature, you can return it to the battlefield as an aura to enchant a target forest you control. That forest can then tap for 3 mana of any one color, and you get 2 rad counters. Harold and Bob loses all other abilities while it's an aura. This is a really interesting card. It's a very synergistic piece of ramp that gets even better after it dies. You do have to control a forest in order to maximize its value, but I think we can get a forest into play easily in a green deck. Turning a basic land into basically a Gilded Lotus can provide us with so much mana in the long run that this should definitely be a mainstay in the deck. Infesting Radroach is another 2/2 with flying for 3 mana. It can't block. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get that many rad counters. Whenever an opponent mills a non-land card, if the Radroach is in your graveyard, you may return it to your hand. This thing is persistent. Firstly, it benefits greatly from power buffs, as the combat damage it deals is directly translated into an equal number of rad counters, which is something I always love commander cards to do. This will scale very nicely as it grows larger, and since it can't block, we might as well swing out with it as much as possible. It having that recursion upon an opponent milling a non-land card means that we will very easily have access to it, so long as we keep up on that mill strategy. Jason Bright Glowing Prophet is a 2/3 zombie mutant advisor for 3 mana. Whenever a zombie or a mutant you control dies, if its power was different from its base power, you draw a card. It also has Come Fly With Me, where you can pay 2, sacrifice a creature, and then put a +1/+1 counter onto a target creature you control. It gains flying until the end of turn. This is probably the best zombie aristocrat card we've gotten in a long time. See, it only cares about the current power being different, so if the zombie or mutant has a +1 counter on it, a -1 counter on it, a buff, a debuff, as long as the power is not the number marked on the card, we draw a card. Zombies have among the largest number of cards that give buffs among creature-based strategies, and so getting card draw off of this will be easy peasy. Marcus, Mutant Mayor, is a 4/4 Mutant Advisor for 5 mana. It has both Vigilance and Trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card if that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. If it doesn't, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. I love this card. So many cards in this deck care about counters, as we just saw with Jason Bright. Being able to put +1/+1 counters onto cards just for poking at opponents is a huge amount of value, let alone the card draw we're enabling if we already have the counters out. This will also translate into us getting quite a bit of card draw off of it. And while 5 mana is a little steep on the curve, it does pivot quite nicely from being a +1/+1 counter engine to being a card draw engine. Screeching Scorchbeast is a 5/5 Bat Mutant for 6 mana. It has both Flying and Menace. Whenever it attacks, each player gets 2 rad counters. Whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, you may create that many 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens. Do this only once per turn. This is perhaps the strongest card in the deck, to be fair. Firstly, it gives each player 2 rad counters just upon it attacking. This ensures that in the next pre-combat main phase, they mill at least 2 cards. Whenever non-land cards are milled, you create untapped 2/2 zombie mutants. Yes, you only do this once per turn, but it is a May ability, meaning that you can hold off until you hit the mill that you want to use it on, to make the zombie mutant tokens, letting you quite literally make the most of the mill. You also getting to do this once per turn means that each opponent's turn will give you an opportunity to get more tokens. You then begin your turn with a zombie mutant horde that will not be affected by summoning sickness to finish off your opponents. Nuclear Fallout is X and 2 black for a sorcery. Each creature gets twice -X/-X until end of turn, and then each player gets X rad counters. A board wipe that doubles the mana investment and gives each player rad counters is incredibly powerful. I like that you pay X, get the same number of rad counters, but then double that to give a debuff means that at most you only would really need to invest 3 or 4 mana to clear off most creatures. Atomize is a 4 mana instant. Destroy target non-land permanent, and then proliferate. We did get a few proliferate cards in this deck, this being one of them. Proliferate lets you pick any number of cards or players with counters on them, and then give them another of a counter already on them. You can give an additional creature an additional +1/+1 counter, or a player another rad counter for each time you proliferate. This card is quite strong, as you get an instant speed removal piece that also gets a proliferate trigger on top of it, and I could see this card making a case for itself in a great many decks, certainly in the colors to utilize it the best. Mutational Advantage is a 3 mana instant. Permanents you control with counters on them get hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. You prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn, and then proliferate. Alrighty, that's quite a lot of ability on a single 3-drop. We get a Heroic Intervention style protection spell for our cards with counters on them. Sweet. We get a Fog effect of sorts that will protect them from any damage. Also sweet. And we get a Proliferate trigger. Super sweet. Again, we're in the colors that will happily take a Proliferate trigger. Rad Storm is a 4 mana instant with Storm and 1 simple ability. Proliferate. So when you cast this, it gets copied for each spell cast before it this turn, and then that translates into additional proliferates. Depending on what kind of deck you're running, this can be a win con on its own, as it can give enough counters to knock a player out of the game, and depending on what kind of counters you're using. If you play this after players have cast a good number of spells, you can get a ton of +1/+1 counters and rad counters distributed, making your board state and game plan a huge threat. Power Fist is 2 mana for an equipment with Equip 2. Equipped creature has Trample, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you put that many +1/+1 counters onto it. This is simple but incredibly effective. One of the strongest things you can do in Commander is translate damage to value like this. Give this to the Feral Ghoul, and have it grow larger and larger and larger, and suddenly, if an opponent makes the mistake of killing it, well, we know what happens next. Struggle for Project Purity is a 4 mana enchantment. When it enters, you choose either Brotherhood or Enclave. If you choose Brotherhood, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent draws a card, and then you draw a card for each card drawn this way. The Enclave option triggers whenever a player attacks you with one or more creatures, giving them twice that many rad counters. I really like this card, as it gives the table a tremendous amount of card draw, but it gives you way more card draw. If you chose the Brotherhood route, of course. If you chose with the Enclave, it gives you an almost Pillar Fort style ability to protect yourself at the risk of opponents taking on harmful radiation. Vault 12, The Necropolis, is a 6-mana Saga enchantment with 3 chapters. Chapter 1, each player gets 3 rad counters. Chapter 2, create X 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens, where X is the total number of rad counters among players. Finally, on Chapter 3, you put 2 +1/+1 counters onto each zombie or mutant you control. I think this might be a contender for my favorite card in the deck, and I know I said that about the Feral Ghoul, but that was past me, and past me had yet to learn about this card. Because this deck loves to baste players with rad counters, you're more than likely going to get a huge army of zombie tokens. Finally, the last chapter doesn't specify anything other than the creatures needing to be either zombies or mutants to get the +1/+1 counters, meaning that your entire board state will get 2 +1/+1 counters onto each creature. So now that we've looked at the best cards among the new cards, let's take a look at the best reprints we've included in the deck. For this section, I will be talking about generally good reprints, as well as the cards that are helpful in the context of this Precon deck strategy. Winding Constrictor is a 2/3 for 2 mana that gives an extra counter to an artifact or creature we control, and gives us an extra counter whenever we would get a counter. So, long story short, this gives an extra +1/+1 counter when we dish those out, and gives us an extra rad counter when we get those. It's very good value, it's got really cool new artwork, it's not bad for an early game drop. Casualties of War is a very flexible removal piece. It's a little costly at 6 mana, but being able to remove 1 of each type of permanent is tremendous value. I also love the flavor text. Inspiring Call is 3 mana for an instant. We draw a card for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then those creatures gain indestructible until the end of turn. This is great protection for our board state, and it can give us a ton of card draw. Contagion Clasp is here, giving us a -1/-1 counter to a creature upon it entering, and we have an activated ability that gives us a Proliferate. This is a very simple and innocuous card, but it can be used to great advantage as we build up our rad counters. Branching Evolution is back, with the cutest little fella on the artwork. This doubles the +1/+1 counters that we put onto our creatures. This is a very strong ability, and it will help build our board state up to a point where our opponents will not be able to handle it. Guardian Project is a 4-mana enchantment that draws us a card whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield that doesn't share a name with another card we control or have in our graveyard. In Commander, there is a 0 chance that you don't draw off of this, because you can only ever have 1 copy of each card in your deck. Now that we've covered the reprints that are worth keeping in, let's talk upgrades. There are a lot of ways that you can refine this deck to your specific playstyle and preferences, and those are all valid. For our case here, I want to hone in on the zombie synergies and the mill tactics. We're going to maintain a budget of $20 so as to not break the bank upon us building up this deck. To begin, Evolution Sage is a powerful Proliferate engine, and so by simply playing our lands, we can get Proliferate triggers, which can give us both additional +1/+1 counters and give us rad counters. I'd say swap this out for the Tireless Tracker. The Tracker has amazing new artwork, but I might be a bit biased when I say I'm a little tired of clue tokens, and it's just a little bit too slow for what this deck wants. Haven Ghoul Runebinder can exile a creature from our graveyard to make a zombie token, and then put +1/+1 counters onto all of our zombies. This is excellent value, it synergizes nicely with what we're doing, and I think it'd be a great swap out for Lily Bowen, Raging Grandma. Lily Bowen is a cool card and can get tremendous, but it really serves as little more than just a beat stick. Shepherd of Rot is a 2-drop zombie that can tap to have each player lose 1 life for each zombie in play. This is symmetrical, and this can hurt us quite a bit given our zombie count, but I think that given how our deck is already aiming to be whittling down opponents off of the radiation, we can speed the process up with a little extra burn damage. Slot this in for Lumbering Megasloth. Again, the Megasloth is a cool card, and it can in theory be a 2-mana 8/8 with trample, but I'd really not have to deal with that inconsistent tempo it provides, especially entering tapped. Undead Alchemist was literally the card I had in mind while reading through half of the cards in this deck. This 4-drop zombie turns the combat damage that our zombies would normally deal to a player into an equal number of mill. They no longer deal combat damage, they'll deal mill damage. In addition, whenever a creature is sent from the library to the graveyard, i.e. while it's being milled, we will exile that creature card and create a 2/2 black zombie. This makes the radiation counters even more relevant, as the non-land cards will remove the radiation, but given the chance that those are creatures getting milled, that just means we're going to get more zombies, and then the Alchemist makes untapped zombies, which I put a high price on. This would be a great swap out for Piper Wright Public Reporter. Again, I'm a little weary on the clues being too slow for what this deck wants, and given how intense some of our card draw engine can be, I really don't think we need any of this artifact-based draw. Altar of Dementia is a 2-drop artifact that lets you sacrifice creatures to have a target player mill equal to the sacked creature's power. This is a bit generic in terms of mill cards, and it was something that I was trying to avoid while building the upgrades for this deck, but I think that in some cases we would want to trade in some of our creatures to mill opponents who are already low on resources. We do have a few cards that, when they die, we get value, and I wanted to ensure that I had a means to get their death triggers in the event that an opponent didn't want to block or kill it. I'm not a big fan of rampaging Yaoguai, so let's risk that out for the altar. Cemetery Tapping is a 3-drop with Hideaway 5. As it enters, you put the top 5 cards of your library. You can exile 1 face down under it. The rest go to the bottom of your library in a random order. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can mill 3 cards, and then if you have 20 or more cards in your graveyard, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. I use this card extensively in a lot of my graveyard-based decks, and while this deck doesn't do a whole lot with the cards once they're in the graveyard, I did want to have something in place to help utilize a beefy graveyard. This makes good use of us milling ourselves by helping us set up a free spell. That being said, I know it's an oldie but a goodie, but Harmonize is just a generic card draw spell in a deck that's rife with card draw. Dreadhorde Invasion plays into our zombie creatures by giving us a zombie army that grows larger each turn. It also will give our zombie tokens lifelink once they've hit power 6 or greater. Given how much this deck churns out +1/+1 counters, that should be an easy feat and offer us additional life gain, to make up for the life that we lose off of our own radiation counters. Think of it as a Radex. I'll take it over the Contaminated Drink, an X-cost draw spell that I'm just not sold on. Graph Harvest gives our zombies menace, meaning for creatures like the glowing one, we'll have a much easier time getting through. Considering how many zombies we will have in play, it will become a challenge for our opponents to block all the damage coming their way, as they'll have to throw at least 2 creatures in front of each one of ours. I hate to do this, but this would be my slot for Exorable Tide. The speed at which this card operates is just too slow. 5 mana, and then we get to proliferate upon each spell we cast is good, but this is pretty clunky in a deck that probably wants to have win cons in the 5 slot. Oversold Cemetery is 2 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 4 or more creature cards in the graveyard, we can turn a target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. This is great recursion, and it's easy to get to that point. This deck could run something like Eternal Witness or Noxious Revival, but I think Oversold Cemetery is better in this deck, as we will get multiple recursions. I would slot this in for Temple of the False God. It's a card that I think has been proven to be very problematic in Commander. Nothing says unfortunate more than having a land that does nothing until you hit 5 lands. Lastly, I wanted an additional win con in this deck, and so Simic Ascendancy gives us a very clean and attainable win con. We get growth counters equal to the number of +1/+1 counters we give out, and so we can easily reach the 20 needed to win. I added this at the expense of either Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds, which aren't inherently bad fetches, but I really don't like running both in a deck if I can help it. I truly love this deck. I think the radiation counters are a very unique mechanic, and it provides a great deal of disruption to what your opponents want to do. For now, that's going to bring us to the end of this upgrade guide. What are your thoughts on this deck? Are there some cards that you're going to be adding to your build that we didn't include here? Let's talk in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, likes and shares are what help give us the happy juice and help us navigate through the hostilities of the YouTube algorithm wasteland. If you're new here, subscribe to ensure your spot in Vault 56, where you get to hang out with me whenever we come up with new material. And as always, I appreciate you hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you all next video.